Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my co-host and daughter,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
This show's brought to you by the Open to Hope Foundation in partnership with the Compassionate Friends. Well, Heidi, what's the number one unacknowledged loss in the world?
Oh, you know it's sibling loss. It is sibling loss. Our loss is often unacknowledged, it's minimized, and it's overlooked. And that's why I am so excited to do the show today. It is something that's near and dear to my heart. I don't think there's enough out there about sibling loss. And today we are going to be talking with two people that are experts in the field because they've had it happen to them. So our first guest mom is Elizabeth DeVita-Raeburn. Elizabeth is a great friend of mine, and we've done a lot together to build awareness for sibling loss over the years. Elizabeth has written what I think is the best book out there, bar none. It is called The Empty Room, Losing a Brother or Sister at Any Age. She interviewed 77 siblings. This is years ago.
And one of them was you, years ago, right?
It was. And she is a journalist and a writer, so she's woven in all of our stories as well as her own.
Ah, fantastic.
She lost her brother, Ted. And
But just 1 minute.
Yes.
She's in a book with us, right?
She is. She's in a book called, I've got to look at it because it's a new book, Sibling Loss Across the Lifespan.
And I'm talking about my adult siblings that died, my brother and sister, and you're talking about...
I'm talking about actually a client that I worked with, and it was someone that had, she was a woman that lost her sibling in 9/11.
Okay.
And
which brings us to our other guest too, right?
yes. And let me just say one more thing about Elizabeth. She also has another book out, and it's new, and it's called The Death of Cancer, which she wrote with her father.
And by the way, that is an amazing book, and I would suggest if you know anybody who has cancer, if you're going to have treatment, or if you want to help somebody, this book is, you will be so informed. It's an amazing book.
Yes, it is. And the other guest we're going to have is Jim Giaccone. We've had him on our show before, and he lost his brother Joe in the 9/11 attacks at the World Trade Center. And he also was the runner-up for a NASCAR award, and we're going to show a clip about that later. And he is a volunteer at Tuesday's Children. And Tuesday's Children is an organization that helps people that lost someone in 9/11.
Yeah, and he showed us around the 9/11 Memorial Center and talked about his story, and I know you're going to be really interested in hearing about his story today. So let's get started.
Okay, great. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hello.
Hi. It's great to have you on the show again.
Thanks for having me here.
Yeah.
So Elizabeth, why don't we start out by you telling us about how you got started and interested in the idea of writing a book. I mean, what is your story? Tell us a little bit about Ted.
Oh, Ted. Ted was my older brother, 3 years older. I thought he was amazing. He thought I was probably annoying, but, but that didn't deter my adoration. And when I was 6 and he was 9, he was diagnosed with a rare immune deficiency disorder called aplastic anemia, for which there was no treatment. And the only thing they could think to do at that point was to put him in a sterile room. People refer to it as a bubble room. It wasn't bubble looking, but that was the phrase at NIH. And they thought that he would either die within 6 months or that his immune system would bounce back and he'd start working again.
So he was at the National Institute of Health?
Yes.
And your dad was a doctor?
Yes, and that's
wow.
That's why they knew the room was there and that it was available. Yeah. It was something that they used for cancer patients whose immune systems had been wiped out by chemotherapy.
So it was really kind of coincidental, the whole thing.
Right.
Now, it's compelling when you tell the story in the book. I can just see everyone sitting at dinner, and your dad looks down and sees these bruises that are unique and huge and whatever, and he suddenly realizes what his son has.
Well, he said he knew it was either leukemia or aplastic anemia. He wasn't sure which, but he was treating children with leukemia on the wards with those, very particular kinds of bruises. So when he looked down and saw them, he just knew.
That's unbelievable that it happened to his own son.
I know.
How old was Ted at that time?
He was 9.
He was 9, and so your parents bring him to the hospital, and he ends up in a bubble room, and he stays there.
He stays there. So like I said, with this disease, there was no treatment. Their immune system bounced back, or they died within 6 months usually, or maybe a year. So they thought they might buy him some time in this sterile room, protecting him from infection for his immune system to bounce back.
And your father should think that too, because he's been working with other kinds of chemical treatments to help people.
Right.
So the idea that there could find a cure while he's there is pretty reasonable.
Yeah. So what happened though was that his immune system did not bounce back and he didn't die, and he ended up living there for 8.5 years.
Wow.
So during that time, our entire family basically, spent all our free time in the non-sterile outer portion of his room.
And you could never go into his room and touch him or be with him in that room again, right?
Right.
You had to be on the outside of that bubble room.
Right.
And I know that there was a movie that was loosely based on his life, The Boy in the Bubble with John Travolta.
Yeah.
I saw that movie.
So did I. I was the only one in my
That
family
was-
who watched it, actually, and I had to watch it in secret because it was made while my brother was still alive.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And I know that you gave us a picture that's going to be on the show of your brother in that bubble room.
And his Star Trek shirt.
In his Star Trek shirt, and I'd never seen that picture before.
Yeah.
What was amazing to me and interesting to me is how you grew up in the hospital, and your brother was pretty much larger than life. I mean, he knew everybody, and he
Yeah.
started a newspaper, and he played an instrument, and
Did magic shows.
all the
Yeah.
staff would gather in his room.
He would dress up for Halloween for other little kids. A lot of this happened when I wasn't there. There are even things that I found out about his life, like the magic shows he would do for other little kids and the Halloween stuff. I found out much later.
What was your life like, and how did you feel as a sibling? I mean,
You know, I was both aware that I had a very different life from other people, and I was also, it was just very normal to me because this was my life. It happens, you know, when I was so young that at a certain point I remember, you know, it was more life like that than unlike that. I had just turned 6, I think, when he went into the hospital. And so I grew up there and it was very normal, but it wasn't like anybody else's life that I knew.
So it must have been very strange for you when Ted died, and all of a sudden your life was not revolving around the hospital.
It was horrific. I mean, it was, you know, it was so horrific on so many levels
Yeah.
at that point that it was hard to parse that out. Looking back, I realized that, you know, our entire life for 8.5 years had been structured around my brother and that place and that room. And then suddenly we're back home thinking, oh, how does life work? I'm still better at hospital life and all that, I think, than I am at normal life. I had to learn normal life. So that was a process we were thrown into and not prepared for at that
now
point.
I know one of the big things that siblings talk about is how's your mother, how are your parents?
Yeah.
Talk about that a little.
The first time I heard it was at my brother's funeral. And some woman, I think it's in my book, you know, some woman leaned down, and I know she was well-intentioned, but she leaned down and it whispered to me, and of course I'm devastated. You know, there's this coffin
And
hanging
you're
over a
how old?
hole. I'm 14.
Okay.
And she said, you've got to be very good now because your parents are going through a lot.
Wow.
And I was just like, oh, okay. You know, and it seems, you know, you hear this as an adult and you think, well, of course, you know that that's not the case and it happened to you too, but you hear it as a child and you're really kind of being instructed.
Yes.
And you absorb that message. And so what I learned after this was repeated to me many times by other people was like, this was not my loss. It doesn't affect me very much. It affects my parents. It's not about me. And so it took me decades to realize that I had suppressed this loss almost entirely and that I had to deal with it in order to be able to go on with my life.
Wow. And you know, I have a similar situation. When my brother first died and I went home to Rochester, New York, which is where we lived, I walked in and somebody took me aside. I don't think you know the story, and said, you need to go upstairs and call all your parents' friends and tell them that your brother died. Because your parents have been through a lot, and they can't handle anything else, so you need to do that. That's your responsibility. So I was kind of, I was giving the same message. You need to be strong for your parents.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. And so, like you said, it's almost like we don't have the right to our loss, or our loss isn't as big.
Yeah.
It isn't as hard. It isn't as horrific.
And you're so vulnerable in these moments anyway, and and your youth plays a factor. That it's just there's no internal pushback against that message.
Right. And I remember you going into your therapist's office and saying, "I am my brother's death."
Yeah, which is not a phrase that I had thought of before. I didn't even especially think that I was going to her to talk about my brother. I just knew that my life was kind of falling apart, and I didn't know why. And in fact, she had called me before the appointment to say, what is it you want to talk about? And I kind of said, oh, well, the usual stuff. Like I had no idea. I'd never seen a therapist before. And then I walked in and that phrase just popped out of my mouth.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
powerful.
Wow, I am my brother's death.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow, wow. So how are you today with the whole thing?
I'm good. I mean, it was 2 decades of kind of bumbling around with it. And then I did a lot of therapy. And I thought I was like, oh, I've done this. And then I went to write my book and I realized that I had barely scratched the surface. And really what helped me tremendously process it was talking to other people about their loss and making those connections and talking and having to tell the story, because there is something, not about just knowing what happened to you, but about verbally or telling the story or writing the story to make sense of it in your own mind and understand what you thought about it. So that was an important process. And I have to say that again, I thought I was done with it, but it does have a way of reappearing in your life. So occasionally, especially now that I have little kids and they're the same ages, that we were, you know, I can sense that I'm in for a few more surprises here and there, you know, where it comes up.
Well, let's get the roll-in from Jim, because I think he's one that tells his story over and over, too, about his brother's death. And let's watch the roll-in, and then let's have a discussion with Elizabeth, you, and with Jim.
Great.
My brother went to work early on September 11th and he disappeared. This is the only place that we have for my brother. This is his memorial. There is nothing that has happened to me that I wouldn't have traded to have him back. I miss him terribly. My name is Jim Giaccone, and I've been a volunteer with Tuesday's Children for the last 10 years. I got involved with Tuesday's Children after my brother Joe was killed on September 11th, 2001. I am not a rich man, so I thought the most valuable thing I could give was my time.
Jim has been one of our most involved family members. He helps us out in so many different ways. He's gotten in-kind resources for us, helped plan programs, he's gotten venues for us, he's done marathons and triathlons, and he's instrumental in our mentoring program.
I thought by sharing my time with boys that were affected by September 11th, I would be sharing my brother with these boys also.
Jim has personified what we want a Tuesday's Children volunteer to offer.
I think this was a perfect way to make my brother live on. I think he would be proud.
That's powerful. That's emotional.
It is.
I
Incredible.
definitely think your brother would be proud. Absolutely.
I hope he is.
Yeah. And so my mom was talking earlier saying that you have opportunities to tell your story over and over. And how do you go down to, you are at the site, right? And you give people tours.
I am a volunteer, one of many that we give tours at a place called the Tribute Center. And that's where Elizabeth just said that it gave me a voice, and where I'm able to effectively make my brother live on by telling a person-to-person story. We give an overall nuts and bolts tour around the memorial, but the most important part to me is the person-to-person story that we tell at the end of the tour, and it's my way of hoping that my brother is never forgotten.
I love that. So it's interesting because your brother died in such a public tragedy, 9/11, and what I'm interested about is, did you feel as a sibling that the siblings were unacknowledged and their loss was minimized, or not so much?
You're right that it was in such a public, I mean, I had people from all over offering support, but I think I might have taken it upon myself to be that point person for my parents.
Okay.
I thought I had the wide shoulders that I was strong enough, I got big enough shoulders for whatever comes my way, but I don't know if I pushed people away or said I was fine, I'm fine, but it took me years later to find that I needed to have that voice and that community around me.
So at first you were just very strong and you were taking care of everybody else, and I know you were being the family mediator also. Correct.
I was the filter between the two families. There's many families that I've heard of within the September 11th community that fractured, and I wanted to make sure that that didn't happen, because there's a lot of many parts, many moving parts that you don't really realize until this happens.
Right. Well, what's interesting is I worked with 9/11 siblings. I worked with firefighter families for 10 years, but we didn't get funding until year 4 to work with the siblings. Because even in this kind of a public tragedy, there was a hierarchy. So the funding went to widows, it went to parents, and it went to children of those that died. It didn't go to the siblings. And so when I first went in, I finally got, you know, funding to be able to work with the siblings. They were really pissed off. Which is totally understandable, right, Elizabeth?
Yeah.
It's like, where have you been? So it was funny because at first I wasn't working with them, somebody else was, and they went, Heidi, we're afraid of the siblings, they're really mad. Can you go work with them? I said, yeah. And I just, you know, I normalized it, and I said, you have every right to feel mad. Because sometimes there is a hierarchy of grief, and we're not at the top of that hierarchy oftentimes.
No,
So-
it was definitely, you know, everybody, I heard it multiple times that, you know, the parents aren't supposed to bury a child. And it was never, a brother is never supposed to bury a brother, you know, your older brother. So it was a little bit of that, yes.
Even at the site, you know, at the Memorial Center 9/11, you know how you say the names out loud? The siblings didn't say the names for several years. Again, it was the hierarchy. Who's, you know, so it's interesting.
It is. You know, one thing that comes up for me is your brother Ted was young, and your brother was older. And I think, Elizabeth, when we talk about the younger siblings, they've got this whole growing up to do and this whole experience. I imagine you had some fights with your brother growing up, and and you're able to resolve. You know, you got some resolution. I mean, some families don't. They are fractured even as adults, but a lot of times you got the resolution. So you never had the chance to fight with your brother, argue, find resolution, find your place. You know.
Yeah,
as
I mean,
much.
we did our share of fighting and, and all of that stuff. But yeah, I mean, when I talk to siblings, a lot of what siblings who are in adulthood say who lost a little bit younger is I thought we would have time to get back together again. They either had fought or they'd become adults and had kids and lived separate places and they wanted to be close again and they thought I'll have that chance later and they didn't get that chance and they felt robbed. So there was like a double loss.
Yeah. Did you have any of that, Heidi?
I definitely felt like I not only lost Scott, but I lost the future I was supposed to have. Because you're grieving not only for the fact that they're not here, but for, like Elizabeth just said, everything that we're missing.
Yeah.
You know, without them in our lives.
We had our fights. In our teenage years, we had our fights. But when we became young men and we developed we had our own families, we became very, very close. And so I'm very glad, thankful for that. And our children, to this day, are very, very close.
That's so great.
My niece and my nephew and my nieces, they were all very, very close.
Now, I've lost 2 siblings. You've lost an uncle and an aunt in the last 4 years. And one of the things I'll say about that that's different, having lost a son too, is that the issues for me are, my sister did she have 7 kids, I think, yeah. And it's all my nephews and nieces and all their kids. And, you know, she was older. And trying to stay connected with the whole thing, your whole system kind of breaks down with older siblings going too, and you miss connecting with them. But I didn't connect with her that often. She didn't live by me, neither did my brother. But it's just like this whole huge network becomes, you know, now who's going to be in charge?
Because you used to call your siblings, and also your oldest sister was the person that we all went to.
Right.
And you know, you're the baby of the family, and she's not here anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
It is.
I
weird.
was, for many, many years, I tried to figure my place with my niece and my nephew. And in fact, after the first tower collapsed and before the second one collapsed, I was in the street and my sister-in-law called me because we were trying to get in touch with my brother. And she said, I don't have a good feeling about this. I can't get through to him. And if it doesn't turn out well, you have to be there for my 2 kids.
Wow.
Wow.
So that put a lot of pressure and responsibility on me. And for what it's worth, I did try to, you know, just logistically, I thought I was going to, you know, right from that point, I was going to be there for every soccer game, every ballet. And, you know, I had 3 kids of my own, and we lived 2 hours apart.
Yeah.
But I must say now that I'm very happy to say that we are very close.
Well, let me ask a question. What about the pressure that is put on the surviving siblings? We just heard his pressure from the sister-in-law. Elizabeth, what's your pressure?
I think, you know, my pressure was to be okay. That was another thing I think that probably kept me from dealing with the loss later on, was that nothing could be wrong with me. You know, I had to be fine and unscathed and successful and, you know, kind of do everything my brother might have done, you know, get married, have kids, all those things. I got married late and had kids late, so there's a lot of pressure there.
So your parents like, hurry, hurry.
Was it your pressure or your
I think it was
exterior?
a little, it was
That's a good
both.
question.
It was both.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, I just felt like I've got to do something important. I have to make meaning of this. Like there, you know, even now, because I'm a freelancer and I shift to project, I get very anxious when I don't have something meaningful to work on, because I feel like, you know, I grew up in a hospital. I watched what my father did with cancer. I watched this, you know, monumental fight my brother put up to survive, so that I can't waste my life's energy on something that's not important and won't make a difference
I
to
totally
someone.
agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I'm living my life not just for myself, but for my brother also.
Yeah.
And I want to make him proud, and I want to be, like you said, have a life of meaning and purpose, and you both do. I mean, I know you also volunteer with Tuesday's Children.
Well, the two boys, I mean, I think I say it in one of the films that if they get half of what I get out of it, it's a win-win. It's therapy for me.
Because they lost their father in the
Right,
trade
they
center.
lost their dad.
Yeah.
They were very, very young. They were 2.5 and 2 months old when their father was killed on that same day.
Wow.
So let's kind of do a little go around about advice. Elizabeth, what do you have advice? You can take a look
Boy.
at the camera if you want to give some advice or to me.
Wow.
What advice do you have for somebody who's lost a sibling?
It depends on the age.
What about younger? What advice would you have for parents or whoever or anybody?
That's actually always the hardest one, because parents, you know, I've spoken at a few conferences, and especially parents of teenagers are like, what do I do? You know,
Yeah.
what I say, they don't talk, because teenagers don't
That's
talk
the big one.
anyway, you know.
Yes.
Gosh.
Or somebody who lost a sibling and they're your age and they haven't dealt with it too.
That there's no way out but through. I mean, you know,
No
I
way out
tried.
but through.
I tried to avoid and avoid. I tried everything to not deal with it, and it has to be dealt with, or you won't be able to live your life fully. So, and that's the biggest acknowledgement of your love for your sibling that you can have, I think, is to live your life fully and to make your most of your time here. So.
And what I'm hearing from you, if I were a parent and parents are listening, Elizabeth says it's never too late, and your adult kids may be the ones that have to do it. You're not responsible for everything that happened in their
Yeah.
childhood.
Yeah.
And they can do it later.
Yeah.
You can
Oh,
work
yeah.
it through later.
I get emails from people in their 70s saying, who read my book and say, I didn't understand it until now, and you know, I can finally understand it, and you know, they're starting to explore their story. Why not?
So get the empty room, and where do you get it, Elizabeth?
Amazon or bookstores.
Okay, you can get it on Amazon. So great, never too late. Jim, what are some of your thoughts for bereaved siblings?
Well, the thing that I found was that I found a community of people like me, and I found an avenue for a voice. And it took me many years. I began with Tuesday's Children in 2006, and I began with the Tribute Center in 2010. And once I found that voice, I think I said it on the last show, that the sun was brighter. And I felt healthier.
So find your voice.
Yeah, so find
I love
places.
it.
And that's
And-
what we're basically doing with this, right?
Absolutely. I just want to say to the parents out there, even if your children are not grieving in front of you, they are grieving. Oftentimes we don't want to grieve in front of you because we're being given, you know, information, and we're being given messages of be strong for your parents. This was really hard on your parents. So we're trying to be good kids by not grieving in front of you. But it doesn't mean that we're not grieving.
And sometimes you grieve with your friends,
Absolutely.
too, right?
We grieve online, we grieve with our friends, we grieve alone.
So it's my turn to give some advice, and I guess I would say if you have lost adult siblings, as I did, I think Facebook is such a great venue. If you can figure out how to get yourself on Facebook and connect with your nephews and nieces, it's pretty amazing, and you can follow what they're doing, and they'll comment on what you're doing.
And,
so
and as a
I
side
found-
to that, if you want to join a Sibling Loss page on Facebook, The Compassionate Friends Sound of the Siblings is a closed Facebook page for bereaved siblings, and it's fabulous.
And I would also say you might want to go to the Compassionate Friends National Conference, and you know, even if you lost an adult sibling, our #1 visit on our site is loss of adult parents and siblings. So there are a lot of people hurting out there, and it's never too late or never too early to resolve those issues that you've had with them, and you might want to talk to write them a letter, you know, there are all sorts of things that you can do. Get some therapy, get some help, but talk about it, even though maybe it's way back.
Absolutely. Like Elizabeth said, it's never too late.
And how about you, Heidi?
What about me?
What advice do you have for people out there?
I just think reach out. Don't do this alone. Reach out to other siblings because they really, really get it. Get Elizabeth's book because I swear I underlined every single sentence. And I was like, oh my gosh. You know, because like Elizabeth and, you know, Jim said today, things keep coming up around our sibling loss. I mean, and they will for a lifetime. So it's good to know you're not alone and that others have been there and made it. You're going to too.
Absolutely. And let's go around and talk about one comment you've got for parents that are worried about their kids.
Oh boy.
Because there are a lot of them, aren't there?
Yes.
Most of what I got from parents who worried about their kids is they worried because their kids weren't talking. But you know, I think probably what Heidi said is pertinent to that, which is that, you know, it's hard for us to show the grief in front because we're trying to be okay.
Yeah.
Because you need something else to worry about, and this kid's not okay. You know, I'm not sure without knowing individual kids how to break through that for adults. But I don't have any.
Okay. Well, good thought. Jim, you got one last one?
Well, if I may, I just want to tell, it just reminded me of a story. My oldest daughter, when this happened, shortly thereafter, I think we were up, my wife and I were up at a teacher-parent conference, and the teacher showed us a letter, an essay that my daughter had written, and it was called The Squeaky Stair. And she knew the stairs that would squeak on the way down, and she would make sure she stepped on the squeaky stair to make sure she alerted my wife that she was coming down the stairs, so my wife would stop crying, so she would be strong in front of my daughter, and my daughter knew enough to hit that squeaky stair to make sure that my wife knew that, you know, she was coming down the stairs.
I love this, and it reminds me of something else, some other advice I want to give the parents out there. Please don't say to us, you no longer want to live and you don't know how you're going to go on, because it makes us feel like we're not enough. And we've lost a sibling. We can't even fathom or think about the idea of losing a parent also.
Oh, well, Heidi, let's close on that note, and we want to thank you guys for being on the show today. It's been great. And God bless all you siblings out there. And Heidi and I always want to remind you, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own. And good night.